Hello and welcome. Have you been working on Docker images and they all turned out to be really large, and now you're trying to figure out how can I shrink my Docker image? In this video I will show you how you can control your Docker image size by sending it on a diet. Though developing small Docker images is not a priority, security and speed of delivery usually is more important than the size of a Docker image. However, eventually you may run into the problem that you need to go ahead and develop a smaller Docker image to increase execution speed. So let's start with first looking at a base image, meaning our boss came in and said, I need this developed, and we create a Docker image. So what I've done here is I went ahead and for this example have set up a very simple Python Flask application in a Docker container. I will use this application throughout the entire demo. But you see here I'm using Flask RESTful. I'm having two endpoints. I'm adding my resources, and then I'm running my application. Now, as for the Docker file, which is the more important part here, I went with a Python 397 Slim Buster. I do my pip installs. I install Flask and Flask RESTful. I'm creating a directory. I am copying my application file over in this directory, and I'm running, when the container starts, Python 3, and I'm running my appy script. So with that being said, this is very straightforward. There's nothing complicated here. Let's go ahead and build our image and see what size we end up with. So we just do a Docker build and we will tag it as Python base build, and I give it a version of 1.0. Let's go ahead and build this. And once it's done, we will go ahead and take a look at the size of our image. And it has completed. And now we just do a Docker images, and we will see that our Python base build version 1.0 ended up to be 128 megabytes. Now granted, this is not very large, but it is fairly large, and there's a few things that we can do to make our Docker image smaller. One of the first things that we can do to make our Docker image smaller is not using caches when we install things. So what do I mean by that? For my example, let me go ahead and pull this up in Visual Studio Code, and we will take a look at the Docker file. And what I mean by that is I'm still using the same Python 397 Slim Buster base image, but when I'm running my pip install, I'm telling it to not use a cache for the installation of Flask, or not in cache Flask and Flask RESTful. So let's go ahead and build this image and see how much space that possibly can save us. So again, we do a Docker build, and we will call this one Python pip no cache, and we give this also a version of 1.0. Let's build it. And once that is done, let's take a look what the size of this image is. Let's take a look. And we've saved the whole of 2 megabytes. Granted, I understand this is not much, but if you take larger images with a lot more installs, you may be able to save a lot more size by using just the simple technique of not caching your installs. Other languages outside of Python, Node, Java, they all have also an option, or should at least have an option, that you can perform installations without caching them, or at least clean up the cache after your installation is done. So cleaning the cache will save us, in our case here in this demo, 2 megabytes. The next step, what you can do is you can consider the base image that you're using. In my case, I've been using Python 397 Slim Buster. There's other images that you can use. Yes, they may require a little bit more work, that you may have to install, for example, Python or whatever language you're using, that you have to install runtimes and other dependencies. However, in the end, that may have the biggest impact possibly on shrinking or reducing the size of your Docker image. So with that being said, let's take a look at the version that I came up with here for this demo. And what I'm doing here is I am switching from my Python 397 Slim Buster to an Alpine latest image. As I've mentioned, yes, you now need to go ahead and you need to do your update. You got to install. You still do your pip install, obviously, and the rest of it, like creating my directory and copying the file over and running it, stays the same. But this would be a straightforward version to change the image. So let's take a look when we build this one, how that looks like. Another Docker build. And we'll tag this as Python different image, and we make this also a version 1.0. Let's wait until this build, and then we'll take a look at the size of this image. So this may take a second, it needs to download. Let's do our Flask install. And here we are. And let's take a look. Docker images. And wow, look at that. We went from 128 megabytes down to 126 megabytes. And just by changing the image, we went down to 78 megabytes. That's drastic. That's great. Let's see how we can get it even smaller. Another technique that you can use to reduce the size of your Docker image is chaining commands. In your Docker file, when you run commands, each command that you're running is creating a layer. And depending on what you do in this layer, it may grow the layer and overall the image size. So let's take a look. How would my Docker file look like if I now chained the commands? If I was to chain the commands, you would run one, for example, run command, and then you would just attach an ampersand, ampersand, /. And as you see here, my run command now has all these separate commands in one command, which ultimately means it's only creating one layer. I've also went ahead and applied here not to cache anything when I do my apk add, and when I'm doing my pip install to not cache anything and to clear that out as well. So in this edition, or in this new version now, we have chained the command and we went ahead and cleared our cache. So let's see how that looks like when we build that. So we do a Docker build, and I will call this chain commands, and this will be version 1.0. So let's take a look. Once everything has been installed, where we end up in size in our image. Okay. And if we're taking a look here, we were able to reduce it by another couple of megabytes. And again, in this demo, these changes may not be that drastic. You need to think of if you have large Docker images that you're building, where these concepts will bring you much more changes and better results than in this demo. But this, I think, is very helpful to drive the concept home. So chaining the commands also reduced our image size again, which is also fantastic. Now there's one more step what we can do in order to bring our image size even further down, and that will show you next. Going back to the fact that each layer that I'm adding to my image does increase the image size of the final Docker image that I'm building. There's another concept that can be applied, which is a multi-stage build. A multi-stage build is nothing other than breaking up the Docker file in multiple stages, doing different work in different stages, and then in the end, in one final stage, produce your Docker image. So how does that look like? So in my example here, for example, I have my Alpine latest. This is my base stage, which is all of this. And in here, I'm doing all my installations. I'm installing all my dependencies. I'm installing all my pip dependencies and my Python dependencies. And then I am simply using, for Python, PyInstaller, and I'm creating an executable file that will run my Flask server. So this may not always be possible depending on the solution that you're writing, but there may be other solutions where you can use a multi-stage build to bring the size of your Docker image down. So as you see here, in my final step is where I will literally just take my Alpine image. I'm running an APK update, don't even need to do that. I'm creating my app directory, and I am copying here from base, meaning from this, I am copying my app file, and then I'm executing that. I do not need to install Python, because with PyInstaller it includes all files that are necessary to run this file, and that's all I need to do. So without getting any further into Python and PyInstaller, again, there's most likely similar solutions for other languages, but this is one solution what you can do to bring down the image size overall. So let's see when we build this where we end up in the size. Okay, this may take a minute, and I will be back once the build has completed. Okay, the build has completed and it was successful. Now let's take a look where my image is. Here is my image, multi-stage, and look at that, 15.8 megabytes. We went down from 120 megabytes to 15.8 megabytes. That is quite awesome. If you're wondering, this one here is the image from my previous stage in my multi-stage build. So this one we can delete, we can clean that up later. But for right now, what we are interested in is this final result, 15.8 megabytes. Now you may wonder if during all these different changes that we've done, is it actually really executable, and will it actually start the REST API, the Flask server? Well, I start with the base, and I will just start with the base and then the final. I will not do everything in between. This will take too long. But we'll just do a Docker run, interactive mode, and we use the Python base build version 1.0. Let's see if my Flask server will start up. Fantastic, here it is, and it's serving my REST API. So that worked well. And now let's go ahead and run the multi-stage and see if it does the same thing. There is my multi-stage, and look at that, it is running my Flask server, it's firing it up, and it's serving my REST API. This is fantastic, and this is a very great result that we were able to go from 128 megabytes down to 15.8. If you are interested in diving more into your layers in your Docker images and want to get a lot more detail, there's a great tool available. You can go to github.com Goodman Dive. The tool name is Dive. You can go in here and you can take a look and install it. And this gives you a much better overview of the size of the layers, what is in each layer of your image, and so forth. So I will show you this too real quick. So let's first pull up our Docker images again. And now let's do a dive, and let's start with the base image, Python base build version 1.0, and let's take a look what dive will tell us about this image. And it's not, I will not go through everything that you can see here. I will just point out a few things. So here you have your layers, and you see each layer in your image, and you see the size of a layer. So when you know and understand what's happening in the layer, that also gives you an option to target actually exactly what you can do to maybe shrink that layer size. And finally here you have your total image size. It gives you the potential wasted space, and then it gives you the efficiency score, which, to be honest, I don't know how it is calculated. I can probably look it up, so can you. But nonetheless, this is some of the information that I most use in order to shrink Docker images. One other thing that I would like to point out, for example, over here, you have your current layer contents. So these are, this is the file structure in the Docker image. If I now go into my make directory, you see how it has changed. It has changed the app directory here. And if I'm going one down, that it copied the app file over. You see here how it has been added. So now let's take a look at our final product image. So we'll just get out of here, and we'll just change this to multistage, and let's run this and look at that. This is a lot cleaner. 3 layers, 5 megabytes, 2 and 8, very small. 16 megabytes overall, no wasted space, 100% efficiency score. And you see here there's not much that can be improved on this. Well, there probably is. One of you probably will find something, which is okay. You feel free to leave it in the comments. But I'm very happy with the result. This brings us to the end of this demonstration, and we were able to actually shrink down our Docker image size by a little bit over 112 megabytes, which I think is really fantastic. However, again, it is not a priority to shrink your Docker images. It is more important to pay attention to security, and make sure, that whatever business applications you possibly may write are secure and protected. With that, I want to thank you very much for your time and for watching. If you like this video, please feel free to give me a thumbs up, and if you would like to subscribe, please go ahead. I would be happy about that. Thank you.